We want to tell you about a salon owner we worked with not too long ago. On the outside, her salon looked like the dream, fully booked, phone ringing, team of service providers behind the chair and table every single day. And she was working more hours than she ever had in her life. She was exhausted, like genuinely running on empty. The kind of tired that a good night of sleep doesn't fix. She came to us because something felt off. She couldn't put her finger on it. The salon was busy. She knew that. But the money wasn't doing what she expected it to do. And she didn't understand why.
Yeah, so we decided to pull her numbers, and what we found was a very clear story. Her personal productivity, so the time that she spent behind the chair, meaning how booked she was, how efficiently she was using her personal time. It was sitting around, was it 120%?
Hmm.
120%.
Hmm.
Yeah, she was like, I was like, whoa. That's a big number. 100, how can you even beat 100%? We're like, we know she can do it. Like she was truly maxed out, over her capacity, like we just mentioned. But her team, on the other hand, they were landing somewhere between 40 and 60%,
Hmm.
which means on any given day, like half their chairs were sitting empty. Half their time was going nowhere, and she was carrying the whole team on her back. And there was no systems in place to actually change it. No targets her team were working toward, and no clear picture of what good even looked like.
Yeah, she wasn't running a salon. She was running herself into the ground, and subsidizing everyone else's slow day while she did it. That story is more common than most salon owners want to admit. And today we're going to talk about what actually separates a busy salon from a profitable one, because they're not the same thing. And understanding the difference might be the most important shift you make this year.
Yeah, because we don't talk about trends here. We talk about, what it actually takes to build a salon that works, not just one that looks like it's working from the outside. And today's episode is one of those foundational conversations, the kind we wish someone had set us down and had with us a long time ago. Because the number most salon owners track, how booked they are, is one of the least useful numbers in your business. Busyness is not a business model. I'll say that for the ones in the back. Busyness is not a business model. So let's get into it.
Yeah, here's the thing about being busy. It feels productive. It feels like proof that you're doing something right. And for a long time in the beauty industry, being fully booked was the goal. It was the thing you worked towards. If your books were full, you made it. But here's what nobody tells you: a full book and a profitable salon are two completely different things. And the gap between them is where most salon owners are silently bleeding money. Think about what busy actually means. It means your time is accounted for. It does not mean your revenue is where it needs to be. It does not mean your team is performing. It does not mean your business can survive a slow week or an unexpected expense. The salon owner we told you about earlier, her books were full, but her team's books were not. And even with her running at 120%, the math didn't work because she was one person, and you cannot scale just one person.
Lindsay, when you think about it, that truly is the trap. The
Mhm.
owner works harder, they take more clients, they stay later, and the team gets comfortable at whatever pace they have settled into,
Mhm.
because no one has given them that clear target to work towards. And the hardest part is it doesn't feel like a problem until it becomes a crisis. Because the salon is busy, it looks fine, but you're tired, but you tell yourself that that's just what it takes. It's not. And we want to give you a better way to measure what is actually happening in your business, a way that tells you the truth, even when the truth is uncomfortable.
Yeah, and in golf, and bear with us here because this metaphor is actually perfect. There's something called par. Jen and I know a lot about golf. We one time played Top Golf in Charlotte and decided that, that day I could have been Tiger Woods and she could have been Tiger Woods' wife because she looked really
I was
cute
canceled.
playing.
I was canceled.
So we know a lot about golf. We're experts here, but in golf, par is the number of strokes it should take a skilled golfer to complete a hole. It's the benchmark. So the standard that tells you where you stand. And the goal in golf is to be under par, so below the number. That's where the best players live.
Yeah. So we use the same concept in the salon. We call it PAR, and it stands for pre-books, average ticket, and retail. And those are the three numbers that actually tell you the truth about your salon's health. Not how busy you are, not how many clients or guests walk through the door. These three.
Yeah, and just like in golf, par is your benchmark. So the standard you measure against. But here's where the metaphor flips. In golf, you want to be under par, and in your salon, you want to be above it. So above your pre-book goal, above your average ticket goal, above your retail goal. That's where profitable salons live.
So we're going to walk you through each one and we're going to spend real time here because these numbers, they deserve it. And each one tells you something specific and together they give you a complete picture.
Yeah, so let's kick it off with pre-books. This is the percentage of clients who rebook before they leave your salon. And here's what we want you to understand about this number. It's not just a scheduling metric. It's a productivity mirror. So your pre-book rate is a direct reflection of your team's productivity right now. And it predicts exactly what your productivity is going to look like in the future. So a service provider with a high pre-book rate has a full book next month before the month even starts. And a service provider with a low pre-book rate is starting from zero every single time. They're hoping the phone rings. They're hoping someone fills the gaps. And hope is not a business strategy. So when you look at your team's pre-book numbers, you're not just looking at how good they were at asking a question at the end of the appointment. You're looking at the future of your business. You're looking at what revenue is going to look like in 6 to 8 weeks.
I remember the salon owner that we mentioned in the beginning. One of the first things we looked at was pre-book rates, and her team's numbers, like they told the whole story. Low pre-books meant that their books were always patchy, which meant they were always slow, right? Which meant the productivity gap between her and her team was never going to close on its own. Pre-books are also the most direct indicator of the guest relationship, right? A client who pre-books trusts her service provider. She's invested. She's not just shopping around. She is coming back and she already has a date on the calendar. So what is a good pre-book goal? You're probably thinking, right? We like to see that 75 to 80% as the target for a truly healthy, thriving team. If your number is significantly below that, this is your first unlock. That is where you start. And if you are the owner setting at 100%, 120% of the productivity while your team is at 40 to 60%, go look at their pre-book rates first. That number will tell you everything.
So good. Now let's dive into the next part of PAR, which is average ticket. This is the average dollar amount of every service transaction in your salon. And this number is sneaky because salon owners often think they know what it is, and they're almost always off. Average ticket is not just what your menu says, it's what your guests are actually spending. And there's almost always a gap between those two things. And here's why that matters so much. You can have a full book and a low average ticket and still not hit your revenue goals. So volume without value is not profitability. Let me say that again. Volume without value is not profitability. It's just more work for the same outcome, really.
Yeah. It's like, think about it like this. If you have two service providers, both fully booked, both seeing clients back to back all day. One has an average ticket of $65, the other has an average ticket of $110. At the end of the week, one of them has made significantly more money without seeing a single extra guest or client. Average ticket goes up when your team is doing thorough consultations, when they're recommending color enhancements, glosses, treatments, add on services that genuinely serve the guest. And it is not about upselling in a way that feels pushy. It's about a service provider who is so connected to what the guest that she's serving needs, that the recommendation feels natural. It truly feels like care.
Yeah, I love that, Jen. It actually just reminded me, one of the team members on my team just celebrated. She went from $110 as her average ticket. I think it was when you said that that made me think of it, to
Yeah.
$150. And
Wow.
she said she actually felt lighter and easier than she ever had, and so it just reminds us, when your team is not doing that, when they're not, or when they are, just taking the order and just executing it and just moving on, your average ticket tells you because it sits
Mhm,
flat, it
mhm.
stays low, and your revenue stays stuck even when the chairs or tables or whatever it is that you're providing look full. So a healthy average ticket goal is going to vary by market and by the services that you offer. But the exercise we want you to do is this: pull your current average ticket per service provider, put them all side by side, and just look at the spread. Because in most salons, there are one or two service providers quietly carrying the average, and everyone else is pulling it down without even realizing it. And that spread is information. It tells you who has the consultation skill and who needs coaching. And it gives you a very specific, very actionable place to start.
All right, so let's move into the R in PAR, which is retail. And before anyone turns this off, stay with us because retail is the most misunderstood revenue stream in the salon. And it is also the most underutilized. Most salon owners think about retail as an add-on, right? A nice to have, something that happens when a guest asks about a product. But retail is pure revenue. There's no chair attached to it, no labor cost in the traditional sense. A retail sale is one of the most efficient transactions that can happen in your business. And here's the thing about retail that changes everything when you truly understand it. A service provider who recommends retail is a stylist who has done a complete service. She has a thought about what her guest is going home with. She has closed the loop, and a service provider who never recommends retail is a stylist who finished the hair and sent the guest out the door. And those are two very different experiences.
Yes, they are. And retail is also one of the clearest signals on how well your team understands the guest relationship. Because recommending a product requires you to know that person's struggles, like what they struggle with at home. It requires a conversation, it requires listening. And the industry average for retail is only around 10 to 15% of your service revenue. But the salons we work with and operate are doing between 25 to 35%, meaning for every $100 in services, you want to see $25 to $35 coming in through retail. Most salons are nowhere near that. And that gap is not because clients don't want to buy, it's because nobody asked.
Yeah. I love that because retail also serves your guest beyond the appointment, right? When a guest goes home with the right products and her hair looks incredible, 4 days later she's looking in the mirror doing the little spin around. Um, it truly represents like a really incredible thing for her. And when she sees that, she wants to come back sooner. She's telling her friends. And retail is part of the experience. It's not separate from it. So, our opportunity for you is to pull your retail numbers. Look at what percentage of your service revenue it represents, and then look at it by service provider because, again, you will almost always find a wide spread. One or two people get it, the rest are leaving money on the table every single day.
Yeah. So let's bring this all together. PAR, which is pre-books, average ticket, and retail, three numbers that give you one complete picture. And what makes PAR so powerful is that these numbers talk to each other. A service provider who pre-books well has a guest who trusts her. That trust makes the consultation easier. A better consultation leads to a higher average ticket. A genuine conversation about the guest's hair leads naturally to a retail recommendation. One feeds the next. And when all three are healthy, you have something that no amount of busyness can replicate. You have a sustainable business.
Yeah, if you think back to the salon owner from the beginning of this episode, when she finally understood par, not just as numbers, but as a language for talking to her team, everything started to shift. She stopped managing by feel. She stopped trying to explain to her team in vague terms that they needed to do better. She gave them targets, she gave them a benchmark, she gave them par. And for the first time, her team could see where they were and what they were working toward. And that visibility, it changed everything. Because here is the thing about people, they do not rise to vague expectations. They rise to clear ones. And when your team knows exactly what that target is, they have something to aim for. When they don't, they default to whatever pace feels comfortable. And comfortable is not the same as profitable.
Yeah. So here's what we would invite you to do this week, not next month, not someday, this week. Pull three numbers: your pre book rate, your average ticket, and your retail to service. And then pull those same numbers for every member of your team individually, not just the salon average per person.
Yeah, because the salon average can hide a lot. It can make things look okay when one person is carrying everyone else. And that one person, 9 times out of 10, is you, the owner, right? And when you see this spread, you will see who is above par and who is below it. And you will know exactly where to start. You will not have to guess. You will not have to have a vague conversation about doing it better. You will have you will have a number, and a number is the beginning of a plan.
Yeah, because busy is not the goal, profitable is the goal. And profitable salons are not built on hope and full books. They're built on clear targets, consistent systems, and a team that knows what above par looks like. That is what we want for your salon, and that is what we want for you.
Hey, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If this episode hit home, share it with another salon owner who needs to hear it. Leave us a review, and we'll see you next week.